All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the post-film discussion for Insert Coin. This is Russell Roots. I'm the Community Outreach Manager with Utah Film Center, and I'm joined tonight by Josh Tsui, who is the Director of Insert Coin. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, thanks for having me, Russ, and thank you so much for screening the film.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Really enjoyed it. I took it in last night, and again, really enjoyed having some time with Narc and Smash TV and all those old memories coming back from being a kid in the arcade.
Excellent. Yeah, Narc, it's so funny. Narc is one of those games. I was surprised when you had first mentioned how much you remembered that game. A lot of people don't remember that one.
Yeah, I was a super fan. Let's start off by just tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, I know you were in the gaming industry for quite a while, and you worked for titles like Mortal Kombat and Tony Hawk. Just kind of, how did you end up here today?
Boy, it's been a long journey getting here today. I've been in game development for 20 plus years, and I started my career at Midway Games in the 90s. So the subject matter of the film was that era was the era that I had first gotten into the industry. But just to backtrack a little bit, before that, I had actually studied film in college, and so I always thought I was going to be a filmmaker, and I kind of got into video games by accident. And so my first job was at Midway. I worked there from 93 to 99. And then I went off and started my own companies and worked for other studios. And I always wanted to make a film, and I felt like never really got a chance to do it. So, at a certain point, I realized that, hey, there's a rich story here about Midway, and I lived through that era. So I thought it'd be a perfect subject to do a documentary on. And I took a few years to do it, and lo and behold, that we're here talking about it now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, as I was doing some background for the film, I kind of came across that you really had access to a lot of archival footage that Midway had been taking of itself over the years. How did that come to pass?
Yeah, so Midway was really interesting during that era. We had a department called the Creative Media Department, and so we actually shot a lot of video. The Creative Media Department shot a lot of behind the scenes video of all the productions that we had, and a lot of times those are made for distributors, is for internal uses or for like for other business partners and such. So we had a lot of videos in Midway, and then on top of that, because I had studied film, I shot a lot of my own footage during that era, and so did many other people. And so what ended up happening, 20 plus years later, when I started working on this film, the creative media department, well, Midway went bankrupt, and all the tapes that Creative Media had was saved by Ken Fidesna, the vice president of Midway, who was also in the film. He salvaged them before they got thrown into a dumpster. And so I found out about it. I contacted him and was able to find this treasure trove of videos that they had. And now the bulk of the archival footage you see comes from that collection. But on top of that, I had my collection of videos, other people that I'd either been interviewing or I talked to separately. They all had their personal stash. And so I was able to collect, all of this together. And it was an embarrassment of riches, to be honest with you. There was so much footage. And it was kind of a blessing and a curse because it was great to have it all, but at the same time, I had to kind of, trudge through it and everything. But I was very fortunate because it's, without that, obviously, wouldn't be able to make the films, and people were just very gracious in sharing their materials with me.
Sure thing, sure thing. I mean, as I was watching, I was really kind of thinking, what was the spark to really begin the process of taking all of that and turning it into a film for yourself? Like what was your creative process to make that happen?
Yeah, it's funny. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. It was one of those things where during the process of the film, I didn't really have a set plan, But now looking back on it, I realized, oh yeah, I guess I did a lot of this right. But basically, what it came down to was, I had some footage that I knew that I had early on. This is before I found Ken's stash, so this is just more the personal stuff. And I knew I had like the bare bones in terms of archival materials of what I would need to at least get started on things. Because I was working at Midway during that period, I kind of knew what the story may be. And so what I did was I started off with a little bit of archival footage, but I went and interviewed some of the key people that I thought were going to be the main subjects of the film. And I just did some test interviews with them. And ultimately, ultimately those test interviews became the trailer for the film for me to get the film funded, basically. But it was like, you know, it was a little bit of a back and forth thing. I would interview a group of people, and then they would tell me the stories, and then I would have to kind of act like a detective and, you know, start going on these different paths and hope that I would find footage to support it. That was most of it, but then it got to a certain point where I ended up with so much footage that then the footage started to lead me down to different stories. So there was no one clear path. It was very nonlinear in nature, and in many ways that was the most fun part of the production, was that I thought I knew the story, but
Hmm.
I was kind of discovering it all at the same time. And you know, this is my first time as a documentarian, and in many ways I think that kind of helped me because I wasn't set on one certain rule. I was just like, I'm just, you know, I'll just go wherever the paths lead me to, and it really helped inform the structure of the film.
How long did it take to produce the film, like from principal shooting to editing to getting it distributed?
Probably, you know, in regards to like an official production start, it was
Hmm.
about 4 years. About a year before that, I was kind of just doing some informal research, just talking with people, shooting little bits of video here and there, just doing some short things. But in, you know, I worked on and off of it for about the last 4 years, and it was really interesting because you know, again, I kind of went in thinking there was one story, and it ended up going in very many different directions. And as I was going along, you know, I kept thinking to myself, okay, I'm going to shoot the interviews, and maybe I'll do the rough cut, you know, and then I'll hand it off to an editor, or I'll hand off different parts to other people. But as I got deeper and deeper into it, I really fell in love with the process. And so, you know, I almost took it as an opportunity of, I made it almost like it was like my grad school. You know, it's just like, you know, I got my bachelor's degree. This is going to be my 2 year grad school that ended up being 4 years, and just to learn, you know, as much as I can. And so, so I ended up editing the whole film myself, which is one of the reasons why it took a little bit longer than I thought it would. But I felt like there were certain things in my head that I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to transfer that information to an external editor. So I kind of decided to take that on myself. So it, you know, it's but I would say that, you know, like it was about 4 years. The first 3.5 years was the 90% of the film, and then the last year I just kept polishing, you know, the last 10% until it felt right.
Okay. Oh, great. We've got a question, and I was going to say to the viewers, please start submitting your questions as we roll through the Q&A this evening. I've got a question from Katie. The film focuses on Midway successes. Was there a thought about covering the hard times more in depth, or did you just want to stay in the positive?
You know, it's interesting. I definitely stayed more in the positive, but I do get into some of the negatives, especially when it came to the managerial structure of the teams, or the lack thereof of them. You know, and obviously I show, you know, a couple of the larger failures in the company. Um, the one of the reasons why it stays more leans more towards the positive is that era from, you know, 1990 to 1999 was almost all positive. Is really like towards the end when the arcade started dying and was kind of out of their control. That's when it gets into negative. And so I think the ratio of positive and negative kind of reflects what that era was like. Now, if you want to get into where it gets very negative, it's actually in the 2000 era when things really start falling apart. But that's a whole other film.
I mean, to kind of dovetail off of that, one of the things I thought was pretty interesting, and I mean, I'm in my mid 40s now. I'm definitely old enough to remember this, but there was that criticism as well of the video game industry about the violence that was in the video game industry. And I mean, six of one, half dozen of the other. And it's like we were all people were trying to figure out what was really causing all of these societal tumult.
Sure.
But really, like around Terminator 2, you've got that footage of Joseph Lieberman, which was pretty interesting, and just really take some of our younger viewers back down that rabbit hole and let them see what it was like at that time. What do you feel was the most misunderstood thing about the video game culture or the industry itself?
I mean, I think, you know, I think what the biggest misunderstanding is the fact that people are all were looking for a silver bullet on what was wrong with society. And you know, when we talk a bit about this in the film, is that every generation has something that the older generation gets really mad about. You know, so you're talking about comic books. A lot of people forget that comic books in the 1950s were the scourge of youth, and it was causing them to do horrible things, and that's why you ended up with the comic code. Rock and roll, obviously, and you got rap music, during the 80s and such. And so, it's in our view, video games was just the latest things for people to get on a soapbox about. And I'm not saying that video games, were completely innocent. That's definitely not the case. But I think much like the other things I just talked about, it's a part of many things that can affect people, both positively and negatively. And so, it really just comes down to, yeah, I as a parent, I need to keep a close eye on what's going on out there. It and basically understand how, let's say, how a violent video game can affect somebody, but is it the only thing that's affecting them? Likely not. So that was, it was a weird period of time back then, because I because it's like we looked at it as, like a game like Mortal Kombat, it was more humorous than it really was gross, and that's the way we as developers always looked at it. In any of these games, you look at Smash TV, you blow the head off the boss monster and there's a ridiculous amount of blood coming out. To us, it was more about humor. And so when people really got so angry about the gore, it was a little bit surprising. But at the same time, we knew that our customers understood the difference. And and like the film says, it's like the fringe benefit was that the sales actually went up the angry other people, the more angry other people got. But yeah, it was strange in that it was just viewed very differently from the way we were looking at it. And in all honesty, I don't think kids back then really looked at it as something that was gross. It was really a humorous shock value more than anything else.
I mean, I think that makes sense. I mean, we are kind of in that same place today with social media. So we're having the same sort of criticisms. And I personally see a lot of parallels, again, also being a parent myself, of having to watch what my child is consuming and really kind of thinking through, is this age appropriate? Do you or does the industry really see parallels in that as well?
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, that's, the nobody nobody is out there trying to do something intentionally malicious to affect people. I think what the parallels with social media maybe is that, yeah, things can get out of hand out there if it's not controlled properly. And so
Mhm.
you hear a lot of criticism about social media, and in many ways, yeah, some of the stuff is like a Pandora's box that can, that may get a bit out of control. That doesn't mean that you need to shut it all down, because if you shut that down, you're going to shut down a lot of positives. So it's just basically, well, how do you control this? There's no one answer to it. But I, as a parent, I know what I can control, which is,
Mhm.
all right, you're not gonna have a social media account, or you're not gonna get access to this, or it's gonna be very limited,
Mhm.
and do what I can for that.
Sure thing. I mean, it's all about what we bring in, garbage out. So you've got to be so that literacy. You've got to make sure you're doing the right thing.
Exactly.
I do want to again throw the call out to the viewers this evening. If anybody's watching, they want to submit us some questions, please do. We're looking to ask Josh a couple of these questions, so please throw them our way when you get a chance. I think you have a really unique perspective, Josh, because you were in the video game industry. You're also a filmmaker. Um, Fairly unique. What are your thoughts on how the coronavirus has affected the gaming industry versus the filmmaking industry?
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, like video games have boomed during this whole, coronavirus era, for lack of a better term. And it's interesting in that films have, you need to shoot movies, you need to shoot TV shows with lots of people and everything, and obviously all of this has affected production. But when it comes to video games, we can all work remotely. We can, the production moves on, and people have want more and more games. I mean, you look at the rise of Animal Crossing just during this period
Mhm.
of time. Games like Among Us, where people are playing with their friends, and it's almost like, yeah, it's like somebody had brought this up to me before. Was it's almost like its own multiverse. Like
Mhm.
people are like, okay, I'm in Zoom meetings all day. Now I'm going to go off and play a game, but I'm still meeting up with people in the digital world. But now it's more entertaining than anything else. So yeah, I mean, I think it's been amazing how much it has been helping the video game industry. I think for films, I think in terms of film consumption, now there's there's all these great choices of film, of streaming channels out there to consume media. But production wise, yeah, it's hurting them a lot because you can't shoot films, and now you have these big budget movies that aren't going to be hitting theaters. So I think they've definitely been hit, been affected more than we have.
Sure thing. I mean, I think it's definitely pretty interesting as a person who also watches the industry to see or to wonder and ponder what effect did the disruption to the video game industry result in what happened with Cyberpunk 2077. I mean, that was a game that was a major title that kind of launched and had a very poor launch by all accounts. So I mean, I think about what really went wrong there and how could that have been fixed? How could that have been corrected? But who knows? I mean, we're still figuring out what's going on in this industry and everything else from COVID. So let's see how it goes.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that's been really interesting is film festival, like this Insert Coin was supposed to be in a bunch of different physical film festivals and this whole coronavirus thing happens, and suddenly film festivals have to pivot very quickly, and all of a sudden there's this rise in virtual theaters because people had to think quick on how to get these films out there in front of people, but not go straight to streaming just yet and everything. And there's been a lot of positive and negatives about that, but it's been really interesting being kind of in the center of this, seeing how fast people are moving around. So a year from now, we'll be looking back on this, and it's going to be really interesting to see how the film industry changed because of that.
Yeah, a year from now, we're going to have holograms or something.
Exactly.
I've got a question here from Brett. He thought it was surprising to see all the discussion of Mortal Kombat without mention of Capcom's Street Fighter, which was arguably the major competitor to the series. What informed that decision?
The biggest issue was really there's almost too much to get into with Mortal Kombat. And so, yeah, Street Fighter was obviously its biggest, competition and biggest influence, to be quite honest with you. But it was one of those things where it's, the interview, like when I interviewed John Tobias and other people involved with Mortal Kombat, that was brought up. But the interesting thing is that viewpoint about Street Fighter being a competitor with Mortal Kombat is more of a consumer perception than a reality. And it just may seem really strange, but those two games on the surface seem like they're competitors, but they really weren't. People either played both games or they only played one game and completely not the other. It's kind of, I'm not sure how else to say it, but it wasn't like, I'm going to play Mortal Kombat and really hate on Street Fighter. It was just more like they were kind of indifferent to each other if people were super fans of one or the other. And it was kind of strange. The Mortal Kombat team never felt like they were competing against Street Fighter because it was such a different style of game. And Street Fighter was very Japanese in nature, and Mortal Kombat was very American in nature. And in fact, Mortal Kombat to this day has never been a big game in Japan. It's almost non-existent out there. And so I didn't want to dwell on it too much because I felt like if I talked about that, then it's kind of perpetuating this myth that there were major competitors butting heads against each other.
Can you speak more about the cultural difference between the games? How was one more American versus one being more Japanese?
Yeah, it's just, like if you look at just the art direction itself, is very different. I mean, Mortal Kombat, if you look at it, it's very Western looking. It's very gritty in nature. Obviously, the gore is, the gore and the fatalities and the humor behind them is very different from an Asian sensibility. Street Fighter, if you look at the way it moves, especially the early games, it's very elegant in nature. The animation is super smooth on it. The artwork obviously is very, is the anime influence, art style and such. And so, I'm a huge Mortal Kombat fan. Yeah, obviously I'm biased about that, but I never got into Street Fighter. I never liked the way it felt, playing the game. I love the artwork in it, but the play style, I just was never used to it. So art direction is the most visible difference between the two, but the gameplay is very different from each other. And like I said, they were so different that they weren't really competing against each other in real life.
Okay, thanks. Got another question here from a viewer. Alex asks, Ed Boon was talked about quite a bit, but I don't believe I saw him in the film. Why was that?
Yeah, so I mean, I've known Ed for many years now, and so I asked him many times to be in the film, and I was never given one concrete reason why he can participate, but it was one of those things where I asked him many times and he had to decline, and I just didn't want to push it on him, because we're all on, me and everybody on the team that I interview are all in very good terms, but I don't want to be pushy about it. And so I wanted to respect his wishes on it. He's still working on Mortal Kombat. He's a part of Warner Brothers. And so I think there's, my hunch is at least a part of it is, hey, I'm still in this company. I can't really like be, completely open out there, and talking about things. So I didn't, like I said, I didn't want to push it on him.
Okay, fair enough. Next time, Mr. Boone. Oh, we've got another question from Katie. Well, as she says, not really a question, but as an arcade operator, hearing about games earning $1,000 a week is pretty wild. How do we get back to those days?
Wow, that's a good question. I mean, this is 20 plus years ago, so it was a very different environment then. And games have obviously changed a lot. Back then, I mean, there weren't too many choices. I mean, obviously there were console games at home, but arcades were at the top of the technological, food chain. And so, you have games like the best example is NBA Jam. That game, besides being an incredibly fun game, was just designed to just like, swallow quarters, like, seconds at a time practically. And it's one of those things where I think people have moved on from that style of games. I think a lot of them are playing mobile games. Mobile games have, with the microtransactions are very similar to arcades. And so I think that so people who enjoyed arcade games have kind of moved on to there. I think, I can't predict what arcades are going to be like moving forward, but like, you have somebody like Eugene Jarvis who runs Raw Thrills, still one of the biggest arcade companies in the world. And his games make a ton of money because they're large machines. They're big spectacles. The only way I can describe them is they're like the IMAX of video games. And so I think that's where arcade games have kind of evolved to. And I think some of the older games, just the gameplay is just too simple for people now. I think people like our age, having this, we want to play them more at a nostalgic value than anything else. But I think for younger kids, if they go to an arcade, they're going to want to play some of these games that Raw Thrills makes, where it just feels like you're sitting in a simulator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's, the more I think about what the arcade was, because my son is now 12, and I think about, oh, he's missed out on the arcade boom, but we have the retro style. But I think about looking forward into the future, what's it going to take? And it's going to be like, I think of the games that really blew my mind as a kid, like the full, tilting, whirling afterburner,
Exactly.
like Outrun, these big immersive games. So I would assume, like, if you can get to the point where you've got an immersive holographic experience, that might be what it takes to get folks back to arcades.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's like, think of like the the holodeck,
Yeah.
the Danger Room and X-Men and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that's all technology that's available now. It needs to get a bit cheaper, but that's all, it's all within reach. And I agree with you. It's something that I've been looking into a lot, is how do I, maybe it's less of a game but more of an experience. If I can go
Mm-hmm.
into a room and I feel like I'm just transported somewhere, it's almost like VR without the goggles. I think that'd be very compelling to a pretty wide audience.
Sure. I've got another question here. Josh asks, it was fun to see all of the games I grew up playing. Do you have any suggestions for learning more about the 90s to early aughts arcade history?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously there's a ton of stuff on YouTube and other places. I think a really great book out there is there's a book about NBA Jam that and I forgot the name of it, but if you just look it up, it came out about a year, maybe 2 years ago. And even though it's called NBA Jam, they actually talk about a lot of other games from the 90s and a lot of the Midway games. So definitely look in on that. But yeah, it's I would just go on YouTube and like find your favorite game, do a search on your favorite game. You'll find something out there.
Absolutely. I turned a friend on to Narc last night. I was like, I played this game all the time as a kid.
It's wild.
Check this out.
It's funny because before I started at Midway, I knew about Narc and I knew about uh, some of the early Williams games. But I remember when I first saw Narc, I did a double take.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, this looks like really different from everything else. And then it's such a Eugene Jarvis game. It's like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna, you're launching, you're launching a bazooka at a drug dealer and stuff. It's just so ridiculous. And it's like sitting there next to a Donkey Kong machine. It's like,
yeah.
I felt dirty after playing it, but it was just so fun.
Oh yeah, it was an experience. I mean, it was mind bending. It was next level. There was Narc, and then there was everything else.
Exactly.
All right, I'm gonna kind of draw things to a close here. What's your next project, Josh? What are you working on?
Well, that's a good question. So I have like a few different subjects that I've been mulling over. It's funny because I thought to myself, I'm winding this down. I really got to get the next one going. And so I've been in panic mode because it's I thought, I had this holiday break and I should have gotten something done by now, and I still haven't. So, but yeah, it's I'm very much into pop culture from the past, where it's like from the 80s or the 90s or even the early 2000s. And so I'm looking at a few different things. One of the subjects is again video game related from the past, and another one is kind of I don't mean to be coy about it because I'm still trying to figure it out. But I'm a big fan of 80s teen films, and but I just felt like there hasn't been like something that kind of looks at them in a very critical sort of way. And so I've been thinking about that a lot lately, and so that's been on my mind. But like I said, I like nostalgic pop culture stuff, but I don't necessarily want to be overly sentimental about them. I would love to just kind of dive into something and look at it with a critical eye and kind of give people a new perspective on them.
Sure thing. That sounds great. I mean, I keep asking, where's my shoegaze documentary?
Write that one down.
Yeah, where's my big major motion picture shoegaze documentary?
All right, I'll put that on the list.
Oh man, no more questions rolling in. Josh, thank you so much for your time. It's been a blast, man.
Oh no, thank you again. I mean, for screening the film for your audience and stuff. It's I feel really grateful for it, and I'm so glad people are really finding the film and enjoying it.
Yes, absolutely. Hopefully we get an opportunity to screen it again, perhaps at a drive-in. I understand you're a big fan of drive-ins.
I mean, you know what? If we can pull that off, that's just one more thing off my bucket list. That'd be fantastic.
We're here for it. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to Insert Coin. My name is Russell Roos. This is Joshua Tsui. We bid you adieu. Have a good night.